Well, once again, we're delighted to have on the program the unconventional economist with his treasury of common sense from macro business, Leith Van Onselen. Welcome, Leith.
G'day, David. Thanks for having me on again.
Well, pleasure to have you. Now, you've been a great proponent of Australia having a sovereign fund rather on the scale of that of some European countries. What do you think of the latest developments in relation to the sovereign fund and the decisions of the government there?
Yeah, so what David's referring to here is Australia's Future Fund. So what that was set up under former Treasurer Peter Costello under the Howard government, and it basically what it did was when we privatised Telstra back in the late 90s, Peter Costello basically put the money that we received from privatising Telstra into a national endowment fund, which invests in a whole bunch of different shares and that sort of thing. And the purpose of that was to pay for federal bureaucrats' defined benefit pensions when they retire. And the fund's worth about, I think, $230 billion thereabouts. About 260. And it's worth about $10,000 per head per Australian. So it's not a particularly large fund. But what Treasurer Jim Chalmers has proposed, or has basically said he wants to do, is he wants to basically influence the way the Future Fund invests. So up until now, it's basically been able to invest independently like any other managed fund in whatever investment it believes will earn the highest return. And what Treasurer Jim Chalmers wants to do is basically, try and divert some of that funds into pet projects like the net zero transition and the housing crisis and stuff like that, which I think is a bad move because it's going to basically politicise the fund into a sort of political slush fund whereby politicians can influence and use that money as a sort of slush fund to invest in pet areas. And I don't think that's a particularly good use of our funds. We've also seen it with regards to superannuation, whereby the federal government wants to try and direct our super savings into areas that it sees fit, which I don't think is a good idea. There is a bigger problem here, though, David. It's really the sheer size of the Future Fund is tiny. So despite the fact that Australia has ridden a 20-year commodity price boom whereby pretty much everything we sell to the rest of the world has gone up massively in value, and, talking iron ore, coal, natural gas, things like that, we should be the richest country on earth. And unfortunately, we haven't taxed our resources properly, and we haven't copied, say, what other countries like Norway or Qatar have done. And what we should have done is we should tax those resources properly. We should have used that bounty to invest into a sovereign wealth fund like Norway does. And it shouldn't be worth, $260 billion. It should be worth many trillions of dollars. And just by way of comparison, Norway has a much smaller resources sector than Australia. We're talking about a country here of 5.5 million people, roughly the size of Sydney and Melbourne. And it has taxed its oil and its oil exports at about 80%. So it has some publicly owned oil companies, it has some private ones which are taxed very high. And what it's done is it has channeled its profits, which have been massive, into a sovereign wealth fund, which Norway then invests overseas. So it doesn't invest in Norway. And this sovereign wealth fund is the biggest shareholder in companies like Microsoft, etc. And this sovereign wealth fund is so big now, I calculated it last week, it's worth about $310,000 US per citizen of Norway. So that's 310,000 US versus Australia's Future Fund, which is worth about 10,000 Australian, which is about 7,000 or 6,000 US. So, I think the bigger problem here is that we should have a ginormous sovereign wealth fund, and we should be the richest country on earth because we literally sell just about everything the world needs. Other than oil, we sell iron ore, coal, natural gas, lithium, uranium, nickel. These are all things the world needs. And all the prices of those things have gone through the roof, and there are resources, and we should have gotten some bounty, gotten a lot more bounty from those resources. And if we'd simply done what Norway had done, we would be sitting on masses of wealth that would be commonly owned amongst Australians. Instead, we've done the opposite. We haven't done those things, and we've also grown the population like a science experiment. So we've grown the population by 8.5 million people this century, And what that's effectively done is it's diluted our mineral wealth. So Norway has a direct incentive not to grow its population, because if it grows its population, its sovereign wealth fund, instead of being split between 5.5 million people, it gets split among more people, which means it's worth less per head. Australia, on the other hand, we don't tax our resources properly. We do get some company tax out of it, but then we also grow our population aggressively, which means that our resources get less per head because we keep adding more people to the economy, which means that we dilute our mineral base. So pretty much Australia does everything back to front, and as a result, we have chronically we never seem to have enough budget revenue. We got chronically high debt, or at least household debt. And we should be a lot richer than we are, given we were 27 million people sharing an enormous mineral base.
Is that failure restricted to Labor?
No, it's both. Look, it's all levels of government, and look, Labor made some serious errors the last time it was in government, but it also tried to do things as well. So, for example, it did try and bring in the resource rent tax, which the coalition blocked, unfortunately, and the media blocked, which was stupid, because if we had that now, we'd have a lot more revenue coming in. But on the other side of the coin, after that was blocked, it then diluted the petroleum resource rent tax, which means we get less from our gas exports. And it also did not reserve the gas on the East Coast when it approved the export terminals in Gladstone in the mid-2000s. So basically, Labor tried to do things, and then when it got blocked, it then did a whole bunch of things it shouldn't have done, yes, which has made the situation worse for us.
Good. Well, in the meantime, we're still being told by some people that immigration has nothing to do with the housing crisis in Australia. Are you persuaded that way?
That is the most stupid argument I've ever heard, because the fact of the matter is the federal government's imported about 1 million people net in the last 2 years, or its first 2 and a bit years in office, and it's actually just over 1 million people. But that million people obviously need somewhere to live, right? It's just basic common sense. You can't bring people into the country without them needing somewhere to live. And we haven't built many houses in the last 2 years. We've got supply constraints everywhere because building costs have gone up about 40% since the pandemic. So talking about materials and all that sort of stuff that goes into building a property have gone up about 40%. We obviously have the various governments are building heaps of infrastructure at the moment to try and keep up with the population growth. And what that's done is it's basically starved the housing sector of workers and resources and capital, et cetera. We've got high interest rates. And we've also seen, thousands of home builders go broke in the last couple of years, which means we've got less supply capacity. So in economic terms, it means that if you've done basic supply-demand analysis, it means that the supply curve shifted to the left, which makes it more expensive to build a house at every price point, at the same time as the demand curve has shifted to the right through this high immigration, which just means that the cost of housing and renting and et cetera have all gone through the roof. So this whole notion that you can bring in, swathes of people without having an impact on the housing market is just, quite frankly, idiotic.
Is that housing crisis particularly affecting the eastern capitals, or does it spread throughout Australia?
No, it spreads throughout. So basically, in numbers terms, most of the migrants come to Sydney and Melbourne. So if you look at New South Wales and Victoria, we've added, in the year to March, we added about 340,000 net overseas migration to those two states alone. And that's out of about 550 nationally. So over 60% of the migration comes to New South Wales and Victoria. The problem is it then has second-round impacts. So, for example, for New South Wales is 100% of its population growth in the year to March, which was 160,000, was through net overseas migration. So every birth that occurred in New South Wales was netted out with someone leaving New South Wales because they can't afford it. And most of the people that leave New South Wales then go to Queensland. So then that creates a second round impact for Queensland. So Queensland's population, and the same with Victoria, like a lot of Victorians go to Queensland as well. And some of the other smaller states also get, discards from New South Wales and Victoria. So basically the high immigration goes into Sydney and Melbourne, pushes the people out of those areas, they end up going to other states, which then increases population growth there. So Queensland's population has grown very quickly. So Brisbane's under the pump. Perth, for example, actually has the highest rate of immigration at the moment. So both from other states but also internationally. So although Perth doesn't get the numbers that Victoria and Sydney get, because it's got a much smaller population to start off with, its rate of immigration has actually been incredibly high as well. So this is a national problem we've got. National rental vacancy rates are pretty much low across the entire nation, and demand through population growth is running well ahead of supply. And some of that is, most of that is obviously driven by net overseas migration. Well, actually, pretty much all of it's driven by net overseas migration, but in some markets, like Queensland, it's also internal migration because they get the discards out of New South Wales and Victoria, who end up moving north, for example. So, yeah, it definitely is a national issue.
Are you in any way persuaded by the arguments of vice-chancellors that their international education is not merely disguised immigration?
No, it's absolutely disguised immigration. The fact of the matter is, David, Australia offers the most generous work rights and opportunities for permanent residency and postgraduate work rights as well out of just about any country in the world. And as a result, we have very, very high flows of international students into Australia. They're not coming here to study. I mean, some do. I mean, there's always some who do. But the fact of the matter is, if we basically crack down on work rights, so if we said, if you come to Australia to study, you can't work whilst you're studying, which is basically what America does. So America, if you come in as an international student, you're allowed to work on campus during the semester, but you're not allowed to work outside. If we did something like that, and then if we also, cut back opportunities for permanent residency and postgraduate work rights and all this sort of stuff. So we made it basically, if you come to Australia to study, you've got to come here to study, not to work. I guarantee you the numbers would fall by about 90%.
One of the complaints of Australian students is that they're forced into collective assignments, and that because of the language problems of the international students, quite often it's the Australian students who complete the assignments for a group, including a number of international students.
Yeah, that's right. And it was actually documented by the ABC a few months back, where they interviewed a student from an economics student from the University of Melbourne. And he basically said that his tutorial was held in Mandarin because he was one of the only, locally born students there.
That's extraordinary.
It is. So he said, literally, here I am in a Melbourne university. I'm a Melburnian who was born in Melbourne, and I'm in a tutorial where they're talking Mandarin. Even the lecturer was talking Mandarin because he was one of the only people who wasn't Chinese in that lecture. Now, that to me is appalling. That's an appalling situation. And what they've basically done is to enable, a whole bunch of people who don't speak proper English, et cetera, to pass. They've basically paired them up with the English speakers who end up doing most of the work. And then that cross-subsidises the marks and the assignments of the internationals. And that's very common. Like I spoke to an acquaintance today whose child is actually going through this exact process at the moment, whereby they're at the University of Melbourne and they had the same experience as what the ABC reported. And that was just today. I was speaking to someone about that. So, this is a common thing. Unfortunately, the solution to this is the government needs to, dramatically increase the entry standards to coming into Australia. And, they should be forcing making internationals do entrance exams to make sure they're fit for purpose. There should be increasing the financial requirements. So you can only come and study in Australia if you have, $30,000 at least put into an escrow account before you come. So you're not just coming here to work. They should be able to cover their costs while they're here. That would turn it into a genuine export. And then there also should be, strict limits on working while you're studying, because are they coming here to study or are they coming here to work? There's a whole bunch of things they need to do to tighten this stuff up.
Many years ago, I did a degree in Paris, and I had to pass an examination to get in, but also the examinations of the assignments and so on had to be completed by me. I wasn't put in with a group of French people to write the assignment for me, and this is very bad. If you're going to call this international education, it's certainly not international education. It's a front.
It's exactly the same for me, David. I finished my Bachelor of Commerce, major in economics honours in 1999, and I didn't do one single group assignment the whole time. I did that 4-year degree.
Right.
So it's completely changed.
And Leith, you're a very prolific writer, and people can subscribe to the newsletter. They can subscribe free unless they want greater detail. One of the titles, and if we could just spend a few short minutes on this, one of the titles really caught my eye, one of your papers, and it's Australia's economic luck is about to run out. Now, naturally, I was terrified when I read that. Is that so?
Yeah, look, I probably should have, in hindsight, named that Australia's budgetary luck is about to run out, because what I was really referring to is the Treasurer Chalmers delivered his ministerial statement on the economy last week. And what he basically said was, he said that, they turned 2 huge deficits into two surpluses. After the pandemic, debt was supposed to rise, but, didn't. And this is because of good financial management, et cetera, which is not true. But basically what I was referring to is since Labor came to office, the federal budget has rode a lot of good luck that is not going to be repeated. So specifically, it's come out of 3 things. The budget balance has been revised up by about $1/3 trillion, so over $300 billion over the forward estimates, which is 4 years since Labor came to office. And this is all because of the Russia-Ukraine war, record levels of immigration and inflation. So I'll just quickly explain those. When Russia invaded Ukraine, pretty much the cost of everything that Australia sells to the rest of the world went up. So talking about iron ore, coal, natural gas, all those sorts of things. And what that did was it actually delivered, higher company tax revenue. So again, we didn't capture enough of it, but it did deliver an increase in company taxes. And that flowed into the federal budget, which boosted revenue. The problem with it is, David, us as Australians actually suffered from this because it pushed up the price of gas and electricity prices, which obviously hurts us. But the federal budget definitely benefited. At the same time, the federal government increased immigration, as we know, to record levels. And what that's done is it's increased the number of taxpayers in the economy paying income tax. And that's boosted the federal budget immensely. And then finally, we got obviously the high period of inflation we've had, combined with the expiry of the lower middle income tax threshold, has boosted personal income tax receipts. So those have increased to a record level. So what that's meant is that households have gotten less, but the taxman's gotten more. And those 3 factors are what's driven this massive upward revision in the budget. The problem with it is, most of those factors are now drying up. So, we've obviously got, we're obviously going to have less immigration going forward. So it's still, remaining very high, but it is coming off, which means that we won't get as much revenue there, or as much growth. The bigger issue, though, is the commodity prices are coming off. So iron ore prices, coal, et cetera, are all falling, and they're expected to fall further as China slows, as Trump implements its tariffs. That could push down commodity prices. That's going to hurt the federal budget. And finally, inflation's now coming down as well from its peak, which means the federal budget's going to get less bracket creep, whereby the average tax rates just rise with inflation, even though we end up getting less. And at the same time, the federal government's locked itself into these massive expenditure programs like the NDIS. So that alone costs $50 billion currently, and it's projected to rise to about $100 billion in the next decade. So we've locked ourselves into this incredibly high expenditure at the same time as the federal budget faces, shrinking or diminishing growth in tax revenue.
Yes.
And that's why the luck is about to run out. We're going to have escalating budget deficits going forward.
Well, Leith, thank you for your advice on that. And that will be something which people will no doubt take into account in the coming election. Thank you for all the things you've taught us, and I hope that you will be available again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Speak to you next time.
Right. Bye.